Hello again, everyone. Welcome back. Thanks for being a subscriber if that's how you got here. Thanks for checking out the video if you got here via YouTube search. Hopefully I can show you a few more things today. Don't have any specific how-tos in mind today. Was thinking more of just running through some of the projects that I'm working on, giving you a basic overview. I actually started a project, and in the midst of it I was like, why am I not recording this? But it was too late. I was already had plaster mixed and really couldn't stop in the middle of the process to change or get the video camera set up. So but the good news is I did get a new video camera. Hopefully you're noticing that it's in HD now. It's just a JVC camera that I got off of woot.com. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's like a clearance house for all things electronics and all sorts of gadgets. Unfortunately, it is my bane at times because things do appear on there quite cheaply, and I happened to see this camera, so I decided to buy it. So first things first, on the topic of inexpensive and cheap, I happen to work for an electronics company, and from time to time products will go obsolete, or we just discontinue things and we end up with a surplus that we can't sell. So what I happened upon was a bunch of power cords that were meant for European countries. Obviously they have no use here in the States, but it's good high quality copper cable. And obviously when you're doing wiring, you're always looking for wire and cabling. I thought, you know, I'm going to take these. They were throwing them out anyway. Cleared it with my boss, so it's okay. I cut the ends off, and these are just 16 gauge and some 14 gauge in here. 3-wire power leads for, well, ultimately they're for medical equipment, but they're essentially computer connections. Cut the ends off. They're all 6 to 10 feet, and perfect for running power for DCC, bus lines, things like that. You know, switch motors, whatever. Now, it is a 3-wire. So you don't really need 2 wires. You could strip the jacket off of this whole thing. I probably won't, just because it's a little bit too much work. But however, just a little tip that I picked up. I thought, you know, I'd share this. So keep an eye out for wire wherever you can find it. Yeah, okay, it's only a 10-foot section, and it may not cover that far, but you get some junction blocks, you wire them into there anyway, and chances are you're not running one long string of bus wire anyway. So I got a handful of them, probably got a good 50 feet worth of cable, and you know, it was going to become landfill anyway, so I did my part to recycle. Alright, next thing, let's switch over to the workbench. So the next thing that I was working on is a little bit more for my paper industry, and we'll show you that in a minute. But I was working on these silos that came with the Walthers paper mill, and they're not complete. These aren't glued in place yet. There's going to be piping that goes along with those, so I haven't glued that all in, but got these done. Was looking to try and go for the effect of rusted. What ended up happening is I painted them white, and then I came through with some weathering powders on each individual segment. These started as actual segments like this, each individual piece, and then they get glued together at different, you want to try and get the seams at different places to make it look like it's welded plate together. So before I went ahead and glued them together, I took each individual piece and put some weathering on it. It didn't really turn out like I was hoping it would. So what I ended up doing was I sealed the weathering powders in, and then came back and did a wash of diluted white through the airbrush to kind of dull them a little bit. I kind of like the effect. It wasn't what I was going for, but it'll have to do. I like it for the most part. And then obviously you can see here I just went with some aluminum, fake aluminum metal for the walkways, painted the railings yellow, things like that. So let's flip over to some of the scenery I've been working on. Okay, so this is the area, and if you remember from the initial intro video, this was just a blank kind of bare shelf here. So what I went ahead and did, and you can see it here, kind of like a cross section of the earth a little bit. So here's the base styrofoam, 1 inch, and then from scrap pieces that I had, I put down a layer of 1 inch underneath it and cut it, and then contoured slightly using a couple of tools. Nothing real fancy. This is actually an old steak knife that came with the set that we no longer wanted, but it's got a great serrated edge to it, and it's perfect for when you want to rough cut in the styrofoam. It gives it a good texture, so paint and then ultimately in this case like the plaster has a good surface to grab onto. And then the other tool I used was this Surfoam rasp. I believe that its actual purpose is for shaping styrofoam. I've actually only seen it used for hobby purposes. So I'm not fully sure what this is used for, we'll call it in the real world, what craftsmen might use this for. But this does a great job just removing foam, and again it leaves a nice rough surface texture, giving the plaster and the cloth something to grab onto. So then after I got everything shaped with the styrofoam, I came back and I started with plaster impregnated cloth. I actually used it all up. This brand happened to be from Scenic Express, plaster wrap. Now I know that Woodland Scenics makes their own version, and I'm sure that other companies make theirs. This is what I happen to have, but essentially it's the same that they would use, I'm sure, a medical grade, but they make plaster casts out of this for broken bones. And it dries quite hard. If you layer it up too thick, you get a pretty good hard shell on it. However, unfortunately, as I was working, I ran out of this, so I switched over to a tried and true technique of paper towel dipped in plaster. So after I got the plaster cloth down, or before I should say, I ran out of the plaster cloth, so I went to a tried and true method of using paper towel, which I cut in half of the strip, so I had a roughly 12 by 6 inch piece, and I dipped it in some lightweight hydrocal and that I had mixed up. I wet the paper towel and then dip it into the plaster itself. So I'll make this a little bit thicker than you would normally if you were using it as casting plaster, because once the paper towel is wet, it begins to get the plaster wet and it'll become soupier. But that's okay, it makes it easier to work with. The paper towel absorbs it better and gives you a good firm hard shell once it's done. Now, keeping with my topic of being more inexpensive or trying to find ways to save money as you're working on things, I happened to buy this. It was $11 for this container. It's not super expensive, but it's also not cheap. You can go through this pretty quickly if you're casting rocks. Pardon me, phone call. Okay, phone call out of the way. Alright, so anyway, casting plaster. However, one of the things that I did find is this container. Probably more than I need at the moment, but if you're going to be doing a lot of casting, putting down concrete, things of that nature, I went right to the source. From USG, what is it, US Gypsum, I believe is the company. You can buy right from their website. They have multiple different versions. I went with the UltraCal 30, and if you go, you can see their website right here. Maybe you can't read it, but it's plaster.com, and you can buy directly from them. I don't remember how much this was. I want to say that it was like $20 for this container, and you're looking at 7 pounds versus this container was, let's see, where is it? There's no weight on here. Oh, here we go. 2 pounds. So, twice the price, you get 7 pounds for roughly 3 times as much. Actually, just over 3 times as much. Now, this stuff is amazing. I cast some stuff with it. Once it's done, this stuff is as hard as concrete. It is really tough stuff. But it is ultra lightweight though, which is the amazing part. I don't know what they have in this, but it is some good stuff. But it doesn't expand when you cast it, so it's great for rock molds. Now I will say that if you use it to do scenery, you're going to really be putting a very hard shell on top of your stuff, which is fine. But you will have to use an awl or drill bit to get through the surface to get into the styrofoam to plant things through there. So, but again, in the mode of saving a little bit of extra money or making your money go a little further, I highly recommend going directly to them. So plaster.com, and they make much larger containers than this. Shipping gets a little bit more expensive, obviously, as you're buying 15-pound containers of it. And I've used this all over the place. I've got about half a container left. So to measure it out, I bought a standard measuring cups that helps you be a little bit more precise. So anyway, once I got all that finished, everything's kind of dried. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back with some Sculpt-A-Mold. For those of you not familiar with it, it's different than your casting plasters. It's got a ground up paper in it, so it's more of a, as they always say, it's more of a paper mache type material. You can't get it as smooth as a casting plaster. It's more lumpy, but it'll hide. Like if we look up close, you can see there's quite a bit of texturing on where the cloth were overlaid. All the plaster cloth was overlaid. The Sculpt-A-Mold will help hide those imperfections, giving you a better baseline or a better surface to then come back, paint over, and then put your scenery materials on top of. So now, one of the videos that I did, I got a request for trains running. So here I've got some running through the background here. That first car, I don't know if you could see it, was actually my track cleaning car. It's just an abrasive block that drags underneath the box car, and it helps scrub the rails a little bit as the trains run through. You can see the consist of this train was a mix of everything. That's what I liked about the Wisconsin Central. They would throw in containers with auto racks, with box cars, with grain. It didn't matter. They were moving it. It all got thrown into the same train sometimes. Okay, so now we're on to the area, the paper mill area, and as you can see, I've been working a little bit on this section. You can also see that I got a new shop light installed in here. Now I went with a slightly different color of bulb. I'm just kind of experimenting with what color bulbs. This was a cool white, I believe. It was not the sunlight. The area that we were just in was more of a sunlight. So I'm just trying to see what colors work better, what brightens it up. But I really like the fluorescent lighting because it's lower power, so I can add more lights, get things a little bit more brighter. So coming in here, I've got some painting done on this guy, got the windows installed, got the shipping doors installed, and I also went through and did a base coat in here. As you can see, I just painted this section more of an aged concrete, and then was the original brick and mortar section. The roof here actually had some issues with, I wanted to go with a pea gravel or a gravel roof. So what I did was I used these are N scale from Linsteinix cinder and light gray ballast mixed together. And what I did is I took spray adhesive from 3M, and I had sprayed the piece of plastic, and then I would shake on the cinders, and then I would spray it again with the adhesive, and I would shake on another layer until I got a good coat, and it's sticking pretty well. I've got to figure out how to hide the seams in here, but for the most part it's sticking pretty well, and as you can see I use that throughout the roof on all of the portions of this structure. So I still got some work to do. I got to get, you can see right through it to the backdrop, so I obviously got to hide that, get some window panes put in, finish up some more details, and then come back and do scenery and whatnot. So here's just some more of my layout running. This engine here is actually one of my favorites. It's a Kato that I got as an undecorated unit. This is GP35 with no dynamic braking, and it was I custom painted that one. That's a road specific number. They actually did own those, so, and again, a little bit of a mixed freight. As you can see, this is the 4x8, or what was originally the 4x8 sheet section of my layout. So this guy just kind of goes around in a loop. But again, my son loved this, and actually I'm quite fond of it, seeing as it was one of the first layouts I built when my wife and I had our apartment. So kind of attached to it a little bit myself. So we got some industries in here that I'm working on. This is an old microengineering factory, and then a Walther's concrete plant. We've got a lot of work to do there. But from time to time, because I don't have a yard, I will just swap cars out just to get something new on the layout. So I recently just went through and changed out a whole bunch of things. I got one of my CSX engines in here. This is another custom job. Now if you look this one up, this one actually started life as a I'm not sure what their scheme was. It was pre-YN1. It was actually just a gray and blue engine. But I decided I really like the YN2 scheme with the yellow, blue, and gray. So I went through and I custom painted the unit, got it new decals and everything. So it is a Fubi. It's not a, if you looked up 3266, that's not the engine it actually would be, but it's good enough for me. So I really happen to like the yellow nose scheme of CSX. So now one of the things we'll watch is the mainline train in the background here. The two units on this train, the first one is a ready-to-run a Thurn engine painted for Wisconsin Central, and then the second one is a custom painted Proto 2000 SD45. So you can see they'll go across the lift-out bridge here. And there's that boxcar that cleaning track as it goes. Okay, one last thing I wanted to show you, and again, keeping with the making your money go a little further, finding inexpensive way to do things. I don't know if you noticed on the containers that I had running, I have containers on most of the cars. Now, building up a container train can be quite expensive. You got to buy the cars, which aren't exactly cheap right now. Whether you do well cars, or in my case, I have both well cars and the 5-packer, which is why am I blanking on the name of them, but the articulated 5-pack cars. But everybody wants to see containers on it. A blank bare table train is okay, but you know, usually railroads are moving freight. So one of the things I found was a website, and He's, I believe, you'll have to help me if you recognize the language. I'm not sure if he's a German or Dutch. I'm probably off on both, but here's the website, www.igshansa.de. If you can read that, I'll throw that in the show notes so you can link to it from there. But what he has is these great templates, and I've printed out a few of them, of containers. To be honest, once they're folded up, put on the train, they're really well done. You can see the detail. He's added, shadowed lines to make it look like this is, ribbed 20-foot container. So he's got multiple different styles. You've got Genstar, Uniglory, Mediterranean Shipping Company, China Shipping, and some IGAS Hansa, which might actually just be his. And then of course P&O, I can't pronounce that, sorry. But now the only downside to these, they're great, but they are meant for European A1 sheets of paper, I believe. So printing them out on an 8.5 by 11, you can see that on this bottom one here, it actually cuts off. It's supposed to have a tab up here, and it's actually missing. Now on the 20-foot versions, it's not that big a deal, but on the 40-foot containers, actually this one worked out quite well. This Uniglory one, though, you can see that it's actually missing a little bit off the bottom. It should extend down just a little bit more. However, what I do is I will still make these up so I don't waste them, and I'll put them in the bottom container, in the bottom well, and then you don't see this portion anyway. It's all covered up. So when I build them, you just got to cut them out. And so what I use is I happen to have this Fiskars, or if you've got even better, an actual paper cutter. But this one works real nice. Got it from Michael's, meant for cutting cardstock and all that kind of stuff. It's just got a razor. You line everything up, scribe it, cut it, you're good to go. I printed these on a 200-pound paper, so it's a little bit thinner than a note card, but almost as thick as a note card, so it's got some, you can tell it's not as floppy. It does hold itself a little bit better than a sheet of paper, a printer paper, let's say. It also holds the color really well. I happen to print these on a color laser printer, so the color didn't bleed at all. You may need to go with a paper that holds, if you do an inkjet, but I highly recommend, again, for cost purposes, if you can get a hold of, go into a local Kinko's or something like that and have a bunch of these printed. It'll be, relatively inexpensive, and then the colors won't bleed if you can do it. They also, laser toner doesn't fade. I'm sure it fades a little bit, but it doesn't fade as much as an ink will, an inkjet ink. So you'll get a longer life out of these if you are able to do them with a color laser. The other thing you want to do is once you've got it all cut out, is I will take my X-Acto with a straight edge, and along any fold lines is just gently go across it and create basically a break. So when you go to fold them, you'll get a nice sharp crisp bend. So this is the end result. This is a 20-footer that I did. As you can see, he also has the K-line. And I glue them together with just some Scotch clear glue, and it's got, in this case, it's got two applicators. It's got a thin point applicator, and then it's got a big brush applicator on the bottom, but I don't use that. This works really well. It dries quickly enough, and it holds well. Usually what I end up doing is once everything's glued together, I'll just come back, set some weight on it just to get it to glue properly. But as you can see, now they are quite light. There is nothing to them. You could put some weights inside of them as you're gluing them up, some stick-on lead weights if you need to add weight to your container cards for any reason. I don't, but you can. The other thing I do once I'm finished, you can kind of see it, and I don't know if it'll show up in the video real well, but there's a slight white line from the bend along here. So what I'll come back is I'll just take a black Sharpie, and with the edge of the tip, I'll run it along just like that, and it helps to blend and hide that line a little bit. You can go back as many times as you need to, so I'll just do it again on this one, and then again on the bottom, along the side here. And I found if you use the edge of it, you reduce, see now, that's exactly what I was trying to reduce the risk of, is running across the top there, sometimes when the Sharpie's still dry. Again, if you run into something like that, you put this container on the bottom, stack another one on top of it, and your mistakes are hidden. But if you just run across it, again like that, and it just helps to hide the edges a little bit. So that's a finished container, and I make up a bunch of these when I get some new well cars or anything that needs a container on it. And again, it reduces the cost of trying to put together a container train. Well, that's it for this time, everybody. Thanks again for coming and taking a look. I didn't really have a whole lot of how-tos this time, just some general stuff. Hopefully that's enough. Get a video posted. I want to try and keep getting stuff posted so there's something new to watch. It's been really cold here in Wisconsin, so I haven't had a chance to get outside and make any new trees. Once I can get outside and do that, I hope to have a video of that soon. And then I'm also going to be working on some new hand-laid switches, including a curved switch, so I might videotape that as well, just to see how that goes. I haven't done a curved switch yet, so I'm interested to see how that turns out. So don't know if we'll videotape that. Could be a complete disaster. It could turn out, so we'll see. Thanks again. If you're new, love to have you subscribe.